Have you ever had one of those yawns? You know the kind I'm talking about. A yawn so deep, so wide, it feels like it could swallow the entire world. It's the kind of yawn that stretches your jaw until it creaks, brings tears to your eyes, and for a split second, everything just goes quiet. Well, what if I told you that in that quiet moment, you're not just stretching your face muscles? What if you're actually opening a door to a place you really don't want to visit? Our story begins on a night that was anything but quiet. Picture a little pink farmhouse, standing alone in the middle of nowhere. Rain was hammering down on the roof like 1,000 tiny fists, and the wind was howling a mournful song. Inside, a little pink dog named Courage was trying his best to be, well, courageous. But the thunder was making it very difficult. Each clap sounded like a giant was stomping around outside, and with every flash of lightning, the world outside the window turned into a stark, terrifying photograph. Courage was curled up in his favorite rocking chair, trying to ignore the storm by focusing on his owner, Muriel. She was knitting, her needles clicking together in a soothing, rhythmic pattern. Her husband, Eustace, was, well, he was being Eustace. He was sitting in his own chair, wearing his green monster mask, and every so often he'd jump out with a loud "ooga booga booga" just to see Courage yelp and leap into the air. It was his favorite pastime. After a particularly loud "ooga booga booga" that nearly sent Courage through the ceiling, the little dog felt it coming, that irresistible, unstoppable urge. His eyes started to water, his chest expanded, and his jaw began to drop. It was the yawn to end all yawns, a deep, cavernous chasm of a yawn. He opened his mouth so wide you could probably see his tonsils, his little pink tongue curled up at the back of his throat. And right at that exact moment, at the absolute peak of his yawn, a jagged bolt of lightning ripped across the sky. It wasn't just a flash. This one seemed to have a purpose. It struck the ground right in front of the farmhouse, illuminating the yard with an eerie, otherworldly glow. At the same instant, Courage's yawn snapped shut with a click. For a moment, everything was silent. Even the storm seemed to hold its breath. Then the strangeness began. Where the lightning had struck, the very air started to shimmer and warp, like heat rising from asphalt on a summer day. But this was no summer day. The shimmering patch of air grew, swirling into a vortex of pale, milky light. It looked like a giant, ghostly mouth opening in the middle of their yard. Courage's eyes went wide. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to his core that his yawn had done something terrible. He hadn't just stretched his jaw, he had torn a hole in reality. From the swirling portal, a figure began to emerge. It was tall and unnervingly thin, dressed in a tattered grey uniform that looked like it had been through a dozen wars. Its face was long and gaunt, with eyes that held no spark, no life, just a profound, soul-crushing boredom. It carried a rusty rifle and moved with a slow, shuffling gait, as if the very act of walking was an immense chore. This was a soldier from the sleepy world, the land of eternal tedium. The soldier stepped onto the wet grass, looked around with utter disinterest, and then his lifeless eyes landed on the farmhouse. He raised a hand, not in a wave, but in a slow, tired gesture. And then another soldier shuffled out of the portal, and another, and another. Soon, an entire army of these boring soldiers was marching out of the glowing gateway, their boots making no sound on the muddy ground. They moved in perfect, monotonous synchrony, a silent, grey tide flooding the yard. The lead soldier, the first one through, shuffled his way to the front porch. He peered through the screen door, his dull gaze falling on the terrified little dog cowering inside. He didn't look menacing or angry. He just looked bored. He raised his hand and let it drop limply against the door. A dry, rasping voice, the sound of dust and forgotten things, drifted through the screen. "Thanks for the portal," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion. This place looks slightly less boring than the last. We'll take it. Courage's mind was racing. This was all his fault. His yawn, that giant, world-breaking yawn. He had to fix this. He had to close the gate. With a surge of adrenaline that momentarily banished his fear, Courage shot across the living room and burst through the front door, slamming it shut behind him. He ignored the shuffling army and sprinted towards the shimmering portal in the yard. He didn't know how, but he knew what he had to do. He reached the edge of the swirling light and with all his might grabbed the two sides of the shimmering tear in reality. It felt like trying to grab smoke and fog at the same time, but he pulled. He strained every muscle in his little pink body, his paws digging into the mud for leverage. He pulled the edges of the portal together like he was closing a giant glowing curtain. The light fought against him, a low humming sound filling the air, but Courage wouldn't let go. Slowly, painstakingly, the gate began to shrink. The boring soldiers, seeing their entrance disappearing, turned with a collective, lethargic sigh and began shuffling back towards it. They moved without panic, as if being sent back was just as tedious as arriving. The portal narrowed to a slit, then to a sliver of light. With one final, desperate heave, Courage slammed the gate shut. The light vanished. The humming stopped. The yard was empty. The storm raged on as if nothing had happened. Panting, covered in mud, Courage stood there for a second, a wave of relief washing over him. He did it. He saved his home. But his relief was short-lived. As he turned to go back inside, he saw it. Sticking through the now invisible seam in reality, where the portal had been, was a hand. A skeletal grey hand, its long bony fingers wrapped tightly around the handle of a saw. But this was no ordinary saw. The blade wasn't made of metal. It was carved from a single long yellowed piece of bone, its teeth sharp and jagged. The hand, belonging to a soldier who didn't make it back in time, began to move. The bone saw rasped against the fabric of space-time, a horrifying scraping sound. It was trying to saw its way back through, trying to reopen the gate. Courage's heart pounded against his ribs. He had closed the door, but he hadn't locked it. And now something from the other side was trying to pick the lock with a saw made of bone. He let out a scream that was lost in the sound of the thunder. He ran back to the porch, scrambled inside, and slammed the door, locking it and barricading it with a chair. He peered out the window, his body trembling. The ghostly hand was still there, relentlessly sawing at nothing, the chilling scrape, 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 somehow audible over the storm. Courage knew this wasn't over. He had won the battle, but the war against the sleepy world had just begun, and it all started with a single, simple yawn. It makes you think, doesn't it? The next time you feel that deep, jaw-popping yawn coming on, maybe try to stifle it. You never know what gate you might be opening.